Hello everyone, I will be talking about the cardiovascular system. There are two main types of circulations which occur in an embryo which is growing. The first one being the extraembryonic circulation, which is all the vessels that are not present inside the embryo, they're present outside, which help nourish the embryo. There are two kinds of vessels which do this. First one being the umbilical vessel, which is related with the placental circulation. So there are two umbilical arteries which carry all the deoxygenated blood from the embryo to the placenta to get rid of all the wastes, and there's one umbilical vein which brings in all the oxygenated rich blood from the placenta back to the embryo. Next, we have the vitelline vessels, which are related with the yolk sac circulation. So there are vitelline arteries and veins. The arteries, they come from the aorta, and from the aorta, they go into the yolk sac, and there, inside the yolk sac, they form a capillary network. With the vitelline veins, they empty into the sinus venosus of the embryonic heart. Moving on to the intraembryonic circulation. So this is all the circulation which involves all the vessels which are present already inside the embryo, and these vessels are going to be in charge of forming our entire cardiovascular system in the adulthood as well. So there are two main vessels which are present for the intraembryonic circulation. They are the paired heart tubes, which are connected with the dorsal aorta. And the dorsal aorta, it gives off the intersegmental arteries which supplies the entire embryonic body, and the vitelline and umbilical arteries, which we just discussed about. Moving on to how the heart actually develops. So firstly, it starts developing in this area which is called as the cardiogenic area, and it is an area which is located in front of the head which is going to be formed later on. And it comes from this special type of mesoderm which is called as planktonic mesoderm. And inside of this cardiogenic era, there's something called as angioblastic cords which start forming. So these are basically blood islands, and these are then converted to become into the endocardial heart tubes. So over here, you can see that these paired structures, these are the two endocardial heart tubes, and they are surrounded by this cavity over here, which is called as the pericardial cavity or the pericardial coelom. And this cavity, it lies above the heart tubes and also like in front of the oropharyngeal membrane. And this pericardial cavity later on forms the pericardial sac, which is the sac which is present around the heart. Lastly, when the embryo is folding laterally, that means like these parts, they are going to move more inwards like this to result in a structure like this. So this part, which you can see here, this will become really, really narrow and get pushed down. And because of all of this happening, as you can see in this diagram, is already being pushed down and the cavity has enlarged. So this results in the combining of the two endocardial heart tubes to form a single tube, which is called as a simple tubular heart. This is temporarily suspended by something called as the dorsal mesocardium, which you can see here, this thin area. But this as well disappears later on, and then the heart is suspended in the pericardial cavity only with two attachments. At the arterial end, it is held together by the aortic arches, and at the venous end, it is held together by the septum transversum. Lastly, this is the last stage of heart formation in an embryo. So the heart tube, it kind of bends because the heart is growing and the cavity, the pericardial cavity is not that large anymore. So it has to kind of squeeze in and then bend to fit into the pericardial cavity. And this structure which you can see here, this is called as the S-shaped heart or the cor sigmoidum. So you can see that there's a bunch of structures which are present here, but I will explain them to you on this table on this side. So first one being the sinus venosus. So you can see this end part, like only this bottom part, which has two things branching off. There is a right one and a left one. So the right horn, which you can see on this side, this is going to give rise to the smooth part of the right atrium. And then on the left horn on this side gives rise to the coronary sinus. Then we have the primordial atrium, which is like this area right above the sinus venosus. And this one is in charge of forming all the trabeculated and the rough parts of the right and the left atria. Above this, we have the primordial of the ventricle, and this forms the trabeculated and the rough parts of the right and left ventricles. Then in the green structure over here, this one is called as the bulbus cordis, and it results in the formation of two structures, the conus arteriosus, which is basically this outflow tract of the right ventricle, and also the aortic vestibule, which is the outflow tract of the left ventricle. Then we have this black area, which is called as the truncus arteriosus, and this gives rise to the ascending aorta as well as the pulmonary trunk. Lastly, we have this structure, the white one, which is branching off, and this gives rise to the aortic arch. So as you can see, the heart is like kind of like in a straight line here, but then it's thus folding such that the blue part, which is the primordial of the ventricle, it comes down, and the orange part gets kind of pushed upwards. So this is why the atria are located upwards. There are five layers of the primordial heart. The first one being the primitive endocardium. So the endocardium is like the innermost layer. Then we have something called as the cardiac jelly, which is just a gelatinous substance which is produced by the myocardium. And later on, it has a significant role in forming of the atrioventricular septum. Then we have the primordial of the myocardium. So this is basically just the muscle layer, which will later become the heart muscle. Then the epicardium, which arises from this mesothelial cells, which come from the mesoderm, and they kind of come over the myocardium and they cover it, which forms the outermost layer of the heart. And lastly, we have the neural crest. So the neural crest cells help in the formation of the ridges which are present in the heart, which later will form the aorticopulmonary septum as well as the semilunar valves. Around the fourth week of the heart development, the heart kind of starts getting divided by the septa to form all the significant chambers of it. So it'll result in the formation of the two atria, the two ventricles, and the ascending aorta, as well as the pulmonary trunk. And this separation of the heart, it occurs through two really important mechanisms. The first one being the formation of the endocardial cushions, and the next one being fusion of the wall of the adjacent portions. The endocardial cushions are just basically this thickened area of tissue which come in the middle of the heart. I'll show you in the diagram later on. These endocardial cushions arise in the regions where the heart walls are interacting with each other so that they can come there and they can separate those interacting heart walls to form four distinct chambers. The next one is the fusion of the walls of the adjacent portions. So basically what happens here is that the walls of the heart, which are present around it, they grow towards each other. They kind of merge to form a septum. Lastly, there is a really important structure which is needed for the septa to form, which is called as the subendocardial cushions. And this arises on the ventral and the dorsal walls of the atrioventricular canal. And they arise because of the endocardium, which is located below them. And as the endocardium it grows and it proliferates more, this gives rise to the subendocardial cushions. And these subendocardial cushions are really important for the formation of the left and the right atrioventricular canals, and they separate both of the atria and the ventricles from each other. So how is the septum exactly formed? So the endocardial cushions, they are formed on the ventral and the dorsal walls of the atrioventricular canal, just like I said right now. So this cross section of this diagram is like sagittal. So you're looking at it cut sideways. So you can see this part over here and this part over here. It's like this is the endocardial cushion, and they keep on growing towards each other and to a point where they fuse, like you see in this diagram. So this fuses. So this is the atrium and this is the ventricle. And if you see it from the frontal section, this is the fused endocardial cushion. So these endocardial cushions which are fused over here, they divide the atrioventricular canal into two parts, which you can see like the left one and the right one. So here you can see that this is going to be the formation of the tricuspid valve because it's on the right side, and this one is going to result in the formation of the bicuspid valve on this side. So division of atria, this is a really important topic because it has a lot of things going on. Starting with the septum primum, so you can see that this structure over here on this diagram is like a crescent-shaped membrane which grows from the roof of the atrium and it starts approaching the endocardial cushion. So this is the endocardial cushion and it starts like growing from the roof towards here like this. And you can see better on this side from the frontal section. So this is the septum primum and it's growing towards the endocardial cushion. This space over here and over here as well, this is called as the foramen primum, and that just allows the blood to go from this side to this side, so from one atria to the other. But later on, this foramen primum starts closing, so you can see like only a little bit of it is left here, and it starts closing in such ways like not all of it goes close off in one way, but like there's a few gaps in the septum primum. But before it completely closes off, it gives rise to a new structure which is called as the foramen secundum. So you can see over here that on this diagram that it is kind of closing, the septum primum is closing, but there is this new place which has perforated, and this is called as the foramen secundum. The foramen secundum also starts growing down towards the endocardial cushions, but it doesn't completely close and it leaves behind a small space which is called as the foramen oval. So you can see over here that there's a small space between these two, and that is the foramen oval. Foramen oval has a significant role in the fetal circulation, which I will talk about later. So now let's talk about the formation of the interventricular septum. So it starts off as a muscular ridge which is present near the apex of the primitive ventricle, and then it starts growing upwards towards the endocardial cushions, but it does not completely fuse with it. There is a small gap which is remain until approximately week 7, but later on a new part arises which is the membranous part of the interventricular septum, and that goes and closes the foramen. So that's it. It's pretty simple for this one. Then moving on to the aorticopulmonary septum. The aorticopulmonary septum is just a septum which divides the bulbus cordis and the truncus arteriosus into two separate channels, which results in the formation of the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. So how this happens is that in approximately week 5, the bulbar and the truncal ridges arise from the neural crest cells, and they fuse together to form the aorticopulmonary septum. This septum is in charge of dividing both of the outflow tracts into the ascending aorta and the pulmonary trunk, like I just said. The development of arteries starts from the paired aortic arches. So you can see that there's like a few bunches of aortic arches, which you can see here, but there are supposed to be 6 of them, but the first two they degenerate early on. So the only one of significance which we need to know is 3, 4, and 6. The third arch, which you can see over here in red, this one gives rise to the common carotid artery and also some part of the internal carotid artery. The fourth arch, which is right below it, this gives rise to the subclavian artery and also the arch of the aorta. The sixth arch is in charge of forming both the pulmonary arteries, the left one and the right one. Approximately around week 7, you can see that there is some development which has happened over here. The right side of the dorsal aorta disappears. So you can see like this part, the connection over here, it has gone away. That this causes a shift of the aortic arch on the left side. So that is why the aortic arch is only on the left side, as you can see on over here. And one important point to note is that there's intersegmental arteries as well, like I mentioned in the very first slide. So this one over here, the right one, is in charge of forming the subclavian artery, while as the left one on this side is in charge of forming the entire subclavian artery on the left side. The external carotid artery, it arises from the third arch around the 7th week. So you can see that this one's going up, and even from this side, this one's going up, and later on is going to split into the internal carotid artery and the external carotid artery. Approximately by the end of the 8th week, the aortic system kind of resembles the aortic system like how it's going to be in the adults. And you can see like on the right side, most of it has undergone regression. So the third arch, which you can see here in red, this just forms the right common carotid artery over here. And then it forms some part of the internal carotid artery as well. And the fourth arch, which you can see over here, this along with the 7th intersegmental artery, it forms the right subclavian artery, which you can see over here. The left side of the heart, the third arch also has a similar fate as the right side. So it also forms the left common carotid artery and the internal carotid artery. The fourth arch gives rise to the main arch of the aorta, and then the sixth arch results in the formation of the left pulmonary artery, and also the 7th intersegmental artery results in the formation of the left segmental subclavian artery, which you can see on the side. There are 3 shunts in the fetal circulation which are not present later on in life. The first one being the ductus venosus, which you can see on this side. So the function of the ductus venosus is basically to bypass the circulation which happens in the liver. And once the oxygenated blood enters from the umbilical vein into the fetus, it goes through into the liver, and the ductus venosus kind of bypasses the entire portal circulation, and it just sends it directly into the inferior vena cava. That's basically the function of the ductus venosus. And this ensures that the well oxygenated blood reaches the heart and the brain directly. Then we have the foramen ovale. So it is present between the left and the right atria. And this function is to bypass the circulation in the lungs. So the blood from the inferior vena cava, it enters into the right atrium. And from the right atrium, it directly ends up going into the left atrium, and this allows it to not enter into the right ventricle so that it does not get pushed into the pulmonary trunk, because if it gets pushed there, then it's going to go in the lungs. But in the embryo, the lungs are filled with fluid, so they're kind of collapsed. They don't have any air in them. So that's why the foramen ovale is very important, because the blood directly enters from the right atrium into the left atrium. And that's basically the significance of it. So once it enters the left atrium, it goes down to the left ventricle, then it gets pushed out from the aorta, and then it goes down to the rest of the body. Lastly, we have the ductus arteriosus. So you can see it over here. So it is basically a connection between the pulmonary trunk and the dorsal aorta. And its function is also to bypass the circulation of the lungs. So even though most of the blood from the inferior vena cava, when it reaches into the right atrium, it gets pushed into the left atrium, but some of it still ends up going into the right ventricle. And then once it goes into the right ventricle, we know that it's going to get pushed out into the pulmonary trunk. So when it gets pushed out into the pulmonary trunk, instead of going all the way to the lungs, because like I just said, lungs have fluid and they are not going to be helping in any gas exchange. So this will result in the blood from the pulmonary trunk going directly into the descending aorta, and then it goes to all the organs again. So like I said, all of these structures which we spoke about, they're not going to be present after birth anymore. So there are a few changes which occur. The first one being the ductus arteriosus. It gets closed and then it results in the formation of a structure which is called as ligament arteriosum. The foramen ovale also closes because the pressure in the left atrium rises and it forms a structure which is called as fossa ovalis. The umbilical vein becomes the ligament teres, and the umbilical arteries, the bottom parts of it, they become the medial umbilical ligaments, which you know from anatomy. The proximal parts become the vesical arteries, and the ductus venosus in the liver, it results in the formation of ligamentum venosum. That's it. Thank you.